Welcome back. This is one of the very, very special days for me to take phone calls because in light of the election results, I imagine that a whole bunch of people have got a whole bunch of things to say. So let's take some of the calls. Hit me up at 888-SAS-5303. That's 888-727-5303. Let's go to Roger in California. You're live with Stephen A. What's up, Roger? Talk to me. How you doing?
Hey, Stephen A. I'm calling from Los Angeles, California. My question for you today is, if you won the presidential election, what would your top 3 policies that you would focus on be and why?
Well, first of all, my number one priority would be the economy, because when the economy is thriving, there's less chaos. People are confident that they can go to work, that they can pay their bills. And when you're paying your bills, there's a lot less stress. And when there's a lot less stress, there's a lot less chaos and, dare I say, a lot less violence. So it certainly would be number 1 on my list. Number 2 would be addressing immigration. I don't want to sit up there and say I would just take folks and deport them. I would have to deport some folks, and I certainly would deport criminals and stuff like that, but I'm not one of those guys who believes that because you're an immigrant, you're a criminal. I hate the fact that Trump came across on too many occasions of being that loose with his tongue when it came to immigrants crossing our borders. But I can't find another country in this world that just has open borders and let people come in. And you're going to subsidize them when you know you're going to compromise the economy while doing so and jeopardize the comfortability of your citizens, of your national citizens. I would definitely address the border issues. And again, I'd be very selective in who I deported. But the one thing that I would do unapologetically is close the border. There wouldn't be anybody coming in when you already got over 12 million to 14 million immigrants here illegally. Nobody else would be coming in. I would definitely do that. And thirdly, this is the part where somebody like me would possibly be worse than Trump. I'm not tolerating a bunch of crime. When you have a bunch of crime going on in the streets of America that compromises a business's ability to do business, then everything becomes chaotic. I remember when I was in California at a time in the immediate aftermath of COVID, they couldn't let more than 3 people in the stores at a time because they were getting robbed. Nah. The Stephen A. Smith administration wouldn't be tolerating that. I'd have undercover cops, I'd have detectives, I'd have everybody on the scene. We ain't having it. We ain't having that. I would definitely address those 3, the economy, immigration, and crime on the streets of America. Those would be my top 3 priorities. Does that answer your question, Roger?
Yes, sir. Very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you. Take it easy. Have a good day. Matt in Fort Lauderdale, you're live with Stephen A. What's up, Matt? Talk to me.
First and foremost, I just wanted to go ahead and ask about how you feel about Trump wanting to grant police full immunity.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that if you're a rogue cop and you've engaged in criminal activity, you don't deserve immunity. I'm not somebody that supports defunding the police. I'm not one of those. I also don't believe in castigating all police officers. You got black, you've got white, you've got Latino, you got various police officers of all ethnicities, male and female, by the way, I might add that fact. So I wouldn't be castigating all of them with a broad brush. That's why I don't say police brutality. I say brutality on the part of some police officers. As a black man, I don't want to be castigated for everything and anything that somebody black does. And I don't think that police officers should be negatively stigmatized because of the actions of a rogue cop. But I'm certainly not trying to grant immunity to police officers who've broken the law, particularly those who've engaged in excessive violent behavior. Oh, hell no, I'm not about that.
Yes, sir. I mean, I completely agree with what you said. Did you see the specifics he said at the NABJ conference in terms of that the police already have qualified immunity, but in terms of this full immunity, that there'd be a type of a board to review every case and things like that?
Well, I didn't see all of that, but what I would say to you is that there's nothing wrong with saying that a board gets to review everything. That's not granting them immunity. That's simply saying that there's a board that would exist to investigate their behavior. That way we can deduce what they're truly guilty of and what they are not guilty of, and then it would be handled from that standpoint. That's not just granting somebody immunity. That's saying let's make sure those we impugn with the stigma of guilt are truly, truly guilty, as opposed to a mob-like atmosphere being geared against them just because they wear those blue uniforms, and you have a lot of people within the streets of America that can't stand them and believe they need to suffer as much as they possibly can. You don't want that kind of stuff going on, and I understand that. I appreciate the call. I got to get on out of here, Matt. Thank you so much. Max, you're live with Stephen A. What's going on, Max? How are you?
Stephen A., how we doing?
I'm all right. Where are you from, Max?
Westchester, New York, I'm calling in from.
All right. What's up? Talk to me.
So listen, I studied political science in college. I'm 24 years old. I'd like to say I have a firm grip on policy and our American ways.
Okay.
I have a cousin, born and raised in Highbridge, who is black, and him and I go on every day to talk about sports, and now obviously the election. So my question to you is, as a white man who has a black cousin, how am I to go about telling him that everything's going to be okay after Donald Trump just retained office?
By having faith in America, by understanding that no matter who's in office, no one man is bigger than the system and or is bigger than this country. We've had situations in the past, harken back to time pre-civil rights movement. Weren't times worse then? Weren't times worse in the 30s and the 20s for black folks and women, by the way? Wasn't it worse in the 18th century? America's been around since 1776, right? But somehow, some way, we've gotten to this point. And no matter what you think about one individual, this is not a dictatorship. This is not an autocracy. This is not, regardless of what folks were trying to say, this is not some fascist or Marxist country. This is a capitalistic society that we live in. We have 100 elected officials in the Senate. We have 435 elected officials in Congress. We got 9 Supreme Court justices. We have federal judges and state judges and all of this other stuff going on. We live in a democratic society. And there may be those who come along that threaten to upend it to some degree because they have a following, and chaos reigns because of that at certain times. But we've overcome a hell of a lot more throughout history, more so than one individual can ultimately offset and overcome. That's what you lean on, that's what you pin your hopes on, and you move forward and you march forward.
Absolutely. It's hard to sit here. And again, I will never tell him how he can and can't feel. But, if you look at the polling numbers, the white demographic failed us, us being, the Democratic Party.
You could say that, Max, but here's what I would tell you. Hispanics increased their support for Trump by 13%, as I revealed earlier. Black folks increased their support by 5%. Is it really about them letting down the minorities in this community, or was it them speaking up and highlighting and illuminating the frustrations that emanate from our communities, and they simply had the courage to say, I'm going to vote this way? I voted for Kamala Harris. And I'm proud that I did, because I think that he's a divisive figure that will cause chaos in this country as opposed to being a statesman. But that's just my opinion. With or without him, I was confident that I'm going to be okay moving forward, because I understand what we're dealing with here. The flip side to it, however, is that you have Hispanics, you have Puerto Ricans here, you have Mexicans here, you have Colombians here, along with a bevy of other folks from Guatemalans and Venezuelans and others living in the United States of America, Cubans, let me not forget that. And everybody wasn't aligned. You had some people who voted for Trump. You had some people voting for Kamala Harris because they took their interest into consideration. They look at who they thought was giving them lip service and who they thought could really provoke and promote change compared to what we've been witnessing over the last 4 years. They have every right to do so. 4 years from now, he'll be gone. J.D. Vance will undoubtedly, in my mind, be his successor trying to win the presidency in 2028. Who are you going to have to go against him? What policies are you going to have in place? Are you going to lean on the extreme left, or are you going to stand firm and say, you know what, we need to inch towards the center, which is where Bill Clinton had us in the 90s from 92 to 2000, when he was a very, very popular president in the eyes of a lot of liberals. He was center left. Okay, he wasn't operating on the fringes. So these are all things we need to take into consideration. And rather than look at what Trump is bringing to the table, why not look at what we brought to the table? If you are a Democrat, what you brought to the table and how much of a turnoff it was for a lot of the American citizens out there. Max, my brother, he romped her. He romped her. He won all, there was no blue wall. He won the popular vote for the first time. And obviously the electoral college vote. Yo, that's about a country saying to you, we don't like a lot of things, but we don't think the left has the answer. You got to deal with that. That's not about Trump. That's about the Democrats. And that's what we have to accept.
It's not a matter of accepting, but my follow-up to you would be, do you feel like now we're moving backwards as a society?
It depends.
Especially with control of the Senate now?
It depends.
Especially with control of the Senate?
It depends. And the reason why I say that it depends, Max, respectfully, is this. If we talk, entitlement programs, for example, no doubt that's going to take a hit. We have to understand that. When we look at issues pertaining to the black community, the fact of the matter is we were looking for that from the Democrats. They kept giving us lip service, but they didn't give us a plan. Because I got news for you, $20,000 to start, to help jumpstart black businesses. If you know anything about building a business, even jumpstarting a business, that ain't enough money. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, you've had ample opportunity and ample time. The civil rights legislation was signed in 1964, bro. 1964. You've had nearly 60 years of getting at least 80% of the black vote. And here we are nearly 60 years later, still complaining about a lot of the same things that we've been complaining about all of these decades. And then when the Hispanics came into our country and their numbers continued to proliferate, they catered more to immigration and issues pertaining to Hispanics than catering to the black community. Why? Because the black community said, hey, there's no way in hell we're going to vote Republican. So you alienated the Republican side because they knew they weren't going to get our vote. And then you had the left knowing they were going to get our vote so they could give us lip service, but they never really had to do anything for us. And as a result, we ended up being the only disenfranchised group in existence in this country. So when you say we're going backwards, well, when the hell have we been going forward? That's the question that we got to ask ourselves. I don't know the answer to that question. And I'm saying you and I together can help find out. But what we have to do is stop walking around here acting like, oh, my Lord, we're definitely going to go backwards. When we can make the legitimate argument, we were never as forward as y'all say we were.
I don't think it's an argument of how forward we were. But again, as a white male who is submerged in a group full of other white males who voted Trump, I can tell you straight up, in the last 12 hours, the amount of horrible language that is able to be used in the thought process that they feel entitled and backed now by Trump, it's unbelievable.
Well, you could say that.
Disgusting.
You could say that. My response to that would be this. Didn't you just say you voted for Trump?
No, I did not.
Okay,
Absolutely
I thought you said that. I'm sorry. I thought you said that. My apologies.
No.
My apologies. My point
No
to you
problem.
is this. It is appalling, the language. He is not a statesman. I didn't vote for him primarily because he's not a statesman, and I think that he's more divisive than galvanizing. I get that part. But remember this. Stop holding him responsible. The people who support him are ones who want him to speak to Washington just like that, because that's how they feel towards Washington, because they believe that Washington has been playing us for decades and they despise them for it. So what they have is an individual in him. If you and I came, Max, and we said, sir, we don't like Washington, they really need to do better, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's political speak. But when you hear him saying they're crooks, they're criminals, they're pieces of trash, I can't stand the politicians on Capitol Hill I'm talking about. They're like, yeah, that's how they want him to speak to Washington, because that's how they feel about our representatives. So is the problem really him, or is the real problem Washington and how that needs to change? Let's talk about this another day, because I got to go and I got to take a couple of more phone calls. Thank you for the call, Max. Let's go to Brandon. You're live from Perrine, Florida. What's going on, Brandon? How are you?
Hey, what's up, man? I'm doing good. Hey, first thing I'd like to say is I'm a huge fan of you.
Thank you.
I'm also a huge fan of Trump. I voted the other day, and I'd like to ask, what would you think would happen if Kamala got elected and the tables were turned entirely?
What do you mean? That if the left in complete power?
Yeah, and they actually were winning this presidency, and they won it in the end.
Well,
What
here's what I would tell you. I think that she would be more sympathetic to the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. I have no doubt about that. But I would have serious questions about all the money that she wants to spend, where she would get it from. Our debt is nearing $37 trillion. At some point in time, you got to pay the piper. Well, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do to generate revenue that would enable you to be able to fund some of the things on your agenda that you may have? Who's going to take the hit? How are you going to get that money? Every 4 years, we keep hearing about how the rich are going to get taxed. Somehow, some way, the loopholes are never closed. And as a result, there's always business as usual. The same folks that you see them talking about is the same folks that are serving as their lobbyists and what have you, living in those, chilling in those suites during the Democratic National Convention. What are you going to do about that? So it breeds a legitimate question, and I get that. I also think it's important to recognize the fact that had Kamala Harris won, and again, I voted for her, so let's not be a hypocrite here, I think the Democratic Party would have been at the mercy of those on the fringes with their progressive movement, held hostage by people like the Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, and Representative Tlaib and others. I think they would have been at their mercy, and I'm not sure that would have been good for America. So to me, you can look at the good and the bad of it, but really here's what it comes down to for most independents. People like myself would not have had any problem voting in a different direction if it were not for Trump. It's Trump that we couldn't vote for. But if it was somebody like a Nikki Haley or somebody like that against Kamala Harris, I think it would have been equally of a romp as it ended up being. That's my answer to that question.
Okay,
right?
Okay. Hey, can I ask you one more question real quick?
Hurry up, real quick.
All right. So now that Trump got elected, who do you think the next, president in the Republican side would be?
J.D. Vance, easily. After the way J.D. Vance performed during the debate against Tim Walz, okay? After that happened, there is no doubt in my mind that he is the heir apparent. He handled himself with such skill that everyone is comfortable with him being the heir apparent to Donald Trump. He'd actually be better in their eyes than Donald Trump once all is said and done. Without question. Gotta go. Appreciate the call. Last caller, Jordan from, Jordan, you're live with Stephen A. It doesn't say where you're from, Jordan, but how are you?
Hey, Stephen, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Where are you from, Atlanta?
Atlanta.
Talk to me. What's going on?
So my big question for you is, we saw in this election, obviously the young vote came out big time for Trump, but not so much for Kamala. So what do you think the Democratic Party can do in the future to get the youth vote out more?
I think I saw somebody on MSNBC say this this morning. They said that the Democratic Party needs to let go of its connection with the progressive wing of its party. Otherwise, their days are over. I completely agree with that. The only shot Democrats have of winning any elections in the future is if they stay away from the extreme left. Center left is acceptable. It means you're reasonable. It means you're financially astute. It means you're willing to compromise and work both sides of the aisle, that you're not as dogged as they are on the extreme left, the way they can be on the extreme right as well. There has to be a centrist mentality. Barack Obama, in a lot of people's eyes, came across as depicting that prior to him being in office, and even when he was in office in the eyes of some people. Bill Clinton certainly did that, okay? Biden messed up when he caved in. That's why he opened the borders the minute he got in office with his executive orders. And that's what turned a lot of people off to him. There's no way around that. And I think that's how you have to do it. Remember, when folks were looking at the left, folks remembered the debates about whether a man should be allowed to use the same bathroom as girls because he was transitioning. Folks remember how you had men transitioning to women who wanted to play sports in women's sports. Folks remember those kind of things. And that's the kind of thing, along with stuff like defund the police and things of that nature, that folks do not want to hear. When I saw the romp that took place, the decisive fashion in which Trump won this election, you know what I walked away thinking? What my boys, like my man Jeff in California, who's a staunch Republican, always told me. He said, folks on the left, they will argue, they will fight, they will protest, they will do all of that stuff. He said, us Republicans, we don't say anything. We just go out and vote. And what I thought about is, think about this. Leading up to the election, there was a whole bunch of people. You had some folks, and I think one of the callers mispronounced the name. Her name is Kamala Harris. I'm not accusing them of being there on purpose, but we know her name, and we know how it's pronounced by now. Stop mispronouncing her name. It's Kamala Harris, okay? But what happened? Think about this leading up to the election. They said the polls had it very, very tight. I had renowned pollster Frank Luntz tell me that this wouldn't be decided in days. It might take until next week for them to make a decision before the polls closed last night. Ladies and gentlemen, the polls closed at 7 on the East Coast. And Donald Trump was announced as president-elect by 2 a.m. In 7 hours, he had over 270 electoral college votes, 292 to be exact, in 7 hours. That's America speaking. We tired of all of this. Let's reel ourselves back to familiar territory. No matter how tense and stressful it may be, it needs to be familiar. Not this other stuff we've been dealing with all of these years. Enough's enough. And they have spoken. Donald Trump is in the White House. The Republicans control the Senate and likely the House. That 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court, it potentially may escalate to 7-2. We knew there was a danger of that happening before the election. And a vast majority of Americans, through their popular vote and the electoral college vote, said, I don't give a damn. That's the America we're living in. It has spoken. She, as in the United States of America, has spoken. We have to stand down and accept it, at least for the next couple of years, and then 4 years from now. But today, we have no choice. Got to eat it. America has spoken. America has said enough. That's it.